good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. You're joining Frontline Dispatches. We are a program of Organizing Upgrade, and we're glad to have everybody with us this evening. Join us every Wednesday at 4 p.m. for interviews with folks who are organizing on the ground and across the country to bring about left social change in our country. I want to thank our guest today, Kimi Lee. We have known each other for over 20 years, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that history in a little bit. But I want to welcome Kimi Lee, and she's going to be talking to us about a new political party for California. Kimi, welcome to Frontline Dispatches. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Well, great. Well, we're excited to have you too. We're going to start off first. The California Working Families Party launched last week, an exciting moment for all of us. I've been with you doing progressive organizing around social justice issues, but also electoral organizing. And what a big deal to be able to say. I remember back in college when I was still an undergrad and you're a little bit older, like this is what we dreamed about. So I'm super excited. So
Yes.
Start off by telling our viewers, so what is the Working Families Party?
Yeah.
What do they stand for?
Yeah, so the Working Families Party is a party, right? Like we are a space for people to come together and to have political power, right? And so creating a political home for folks in terms of the analysis and really basing our voting and the decisions we make around voting based on our values. So really thinking about social justice issues, racial justice issues, much more than I think what we find in traditional government today. And so having the Working Families Party as a new space is just really exciting for us in California.
That's amazing. And so there's a National Working Families Party. And would you say that the National Working Families Party is working to, like, I think people really feel stuck by this binary Democrat-Republican system, even though we have some other parties on the ballot. And so people are really looking for inspiration and something new. Right.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So the WFP has been around for a while, and in different states, it looks differently. So like actually in New York, you could see WFP on the ballot. In California right now, actually, it won't be on the ballot. So we are a party here where people can join and affiliate and say they're part of it. But we're not looking for that change just yet. So it's still mostly, Democrat, Republican, Green Party, those things on our ballot. But really just trying to create this new space for folks who want something else. And so what you're just saying, like we've been around for a long time now organizing. And when we were starting to organize, California was Republican, right? We had a Republican governor. We passed all these crazy racist ballot measures for years and years. And so now we flipped it, and there is a Democratic majority here in California, but there's still something that's not quite right. And so there's still a lot of folks that don't feel like the Democrats represent them. And in the Bay Area, we even talk about how there's many shades of blue, right? Like you might have darker blue, lighter blue, and what we call moderate Dems or progressive Dems, and then people we call corporate Dems. And so because of that spectrum, there wasn't really a place for folks that really aligned with more progressive values. And so having WFP come here is, kind of like the answer you were talking about.
That's great to hear. I have a follow-up question on that. I mean, I think a lot of people assume that California is super progressive just because we have a legislature that's democratically controlled, as well as our members of Congress. We have 53 members of Congress plus our 2 senators. And so there's an assumption, right, that then this party represents all the people. And I think there's also an assumption that Black and brown political organizations are associated with the the Democratic political machine. And what do you say about that?
Yeah, and I think this goes to like there's traditional groups that are part of the Democratic machine, but there's still a lot of folks that are just not real, that don't feel it, right? That don't think that the Democrats represent them. And so I think this is where the WFP is a space for those of us that actually there's a larger decline to state number in California than Republican. And so we've got a big blue base, like you were saying, like, yeah, there's a lot of Democrats in California. There's some Republicans. We're not completely blue. And then there's a huge bunch of folks that are declined to state. And so for us, it's really about how do we connect to that big group of folks that are, don't affiliate to the Democrats. And for people of color and immigrants and, and folks that have different values than the Democrats, it's been hard. And for years and years, I never felt like the Democrats were, a place for me, and decades of community organizing now, I was like, am I really a Democrat? But given the choice of Republican or Democrat, I was like, okay, maybe I'm a Democrat, and never really feeling excited or connected. And I think this is what the WFP brings for us, is that as people of color, people with like more progressive values, people who care about worker rights, immigrant rights, and who have been frustrated with the Democrats kind of siding with corporations and siding with the oil companies and siding with, folks that we might not want to side with, this gives us an alternative, right? And I think like this is a space for racial justice, social justice, all these values that we really care about, to have a space up front. And we can actually say that we rather prioritize those things over corporations and money.
Thanks, Kimi. I'd love for you to actually just talk about, so who's founding? Who are the founding members of the California Working Families Party? Who are they? What do you all stand for? Obviously, you're with Bay Rising Action as one of the founding members. Tell us a little bit about your org, but also the other organizations that are launching this effort.
Yeah, so actually there's been a group of us for the last 2 years that have been talking about bringing WFP to California. And so there's a number of community leaders, folks from LA, San Diego, Central Valley, all over California. And many of us come from the same background, where we were doing community organizing immigrants, people of color around racial justice issues for the last 10, 20 years. And we all kind of felt like, we're missing something. Like, how are we building power? And so this idea of having a new political space was necessary. It was always on the horizon, because we never all felt like we could really get behind the current Democratic Party as it stands. So there are a number of leaders. I don't know if I should list them all, but there's folks from LA, San Diego, again, Central Valley, and they're all folks that have been connected. And some organizations have C4s. So when you talk about like ACE Action, or you talk about Power California Action, there, APEN Action, CPA Action. So community groups that have created their own political organizations. There's a list of groups in the state. And I think soon we'll be able to publish this. So all this just came about. We just got endorsed, or we just were voted in as a California charter last week. So it's all very new. But the next step is for each region then to create a chapter. So as we create each region's chapter, we'll list out the community orgs that are connected. And then the leaders from each of the regions will play a part in developing that out. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We actually have a question from Lisa Bennett. And I'm not, I think for California, we still to remain, but, when you say progressive values, what does that look like in WFP? What would a national platform entail and include?
Yeah, so actually you could go to WFP, the national website, and you can see like the much longer, there's a whole platform around what kind of world we would like. But yeah, that's a really good point. When we say progressive, that's a huge container. But one of the examples I just brought up was around like corporations and oil money, right? So right now we have Democrats in California that vote pretty much with oil companies and coal and all the, and all the different polluters that we wouldn't necessarily want to connect with. But there are Democrats that are voting alongside, and there's one Democrat that actually holds $1 million of stocks in Chevron, right? And so he's always voting with the corporations. So I think that's an example of like, what's the difference? We would say that, corporations shouldn't have a say or get priority. When we talk about privatization of our utilities, or if you talk about any of that kind of stuff, like we want things that are going to benefit our community, that put people first. Talk about housing, you talk about education, there's all kinds of issues. So I would say go to the WFP website and you can see like the full platform. There's also a recovery platform around, with what's happening with COVID. Like what's the next kind of thing that's going to happen after COVID and how it's impacted our local economies. WFP also has a platform around that.
That's great. Thank you. I think also a follow-up question on this, I think for California. So, you have organizations like Power California, Bay Rising Action, Cheerla, a lot of these organizations who already have C4s have been launching their own independent electoral work and some stuff in coalition. And so what's your initial thinking about, well, how will you make choices? And because one of the things that Working Families Party does, I've seen, is like endorsement of candidates. You know, that's an important piece, right? Because we want to put our weight where we can, our political weight. And so how are you planning to sort of, hey, everybody kind of does their own thing? Maybe not everybody's going to agree. And so how will you handle that as a party?
Yeah, so that goes back to the chapters that I was mentioning. So the state is being split into 7. So California is a really big state. And so it would be hard to just have one group to do all the endorsements. So actually WFP will rely on the chapters and the regions to then take the local positions. So while there are state positions that the entire state would do, regionally it would depend on those local chapters. They would then have a voting. So the structure basically is it's community organizations, individuals, and actually labor unions. And those 3 entities within each of the chapters would have a certain amount of votes and be able to talk about what's happening locally. And then at a statewide level, and then those chapters represent state representatives. And at the state representative level, then that would be where the state decisions are made. So I think what you're talking about, though, the idea is to have local leadership guide the regional, like whatever city or county positions, endorsements. Those would happen through the chapters.
Got it. Great. Thank you. I want to actually encourage our viewers to drop your questions on YouTube or Facebook. If you have any, we'll try to answer them. And thank you to Lisa for asking a question. So a lot of people might not know that we have an open primary in California. And so what does it mean? What could it mean? I feel like letting our imagination run wild. Like, what could it mean for open primaries here? And for folks who don't know, open primaries, basically the top 2 vote getters are actually who move on to the general election. It's not by party. And so, what would be the role of the Working Families Party?
I feel like there's a part of that even before we get to the ballot, because for the most part, there are a lot of folks that say they're Democrats. So we might have 2 Democrats running against one another. And then that might be where the difference lies. And then, as we bring up our questionnaires and ask them about where would they stand on certain issues, that might be a way to determine which one would more align with you. But I think even before that, WFP and what we're trying to do is actually create more people who look like us to run for office. How do we get more diversity, more women, more, people of color, folks that are impacted by these policies to run for office? And what we've seen in California and in places across the country, usually it's people with money that run for office, because our campaigns are so flooded with dark money and PAC money and independent expenditures, and spending limits there's different ways to get around it, that we actually don't have the candidates that run for office. And then we don't have the support system to actually help them be successful. So then there's times we run somebody and then, okay, good luck, you're now in office. And then we don't have a full, okay, well, how do we actually support them? Are we helping them with the staffing they need, with a research and policy that they need, the coalition building, all these other things that it takes to help them really co-govern with us? So I think having this space, this party space, helps us think about the big picture and all of it, right? So it isn't just about the election. It isn't just about the runoff. It's actually, what's the pipeline of people that we're getting to run for office? How do we support them through that? And then once they're in office, how do we still interact with them, right? Because we don't want to just protest them when they do something bad. The idea is, how do we actually get them to govern and understand what's going on and help them? Because it's not an easy job, to run for office. So there's also that piece of it where it's a certain personality to run for office and then a certain bank account to run for office. So how do we change that? And
or being part of the Democratic establishment. I think for me, that's it's an exciting piece of thinking, running our own candidates. Because right now, for the most part, we're reacting to who's running. And I think, and I think that this just doesn't work, right? Because then it's the lesser of 2 evils and people feel really trapped. And so I'm really excited about being able to do that. We do have another question from Brandon Rey Ramirez. Hey, what's up, Brandon? I'm so glad to hear from him. What's your view of role of Progressive and Labor Caucuses of the California Democratic Party as a political force? I'm gonna let you go first on this, Kimi, and then I have my piece.
I mean, they're important. Again, it's not. We're not trying to replace the entire Democratic Party. For me personally, where it's at is about the folks that don't affiliate with the Democratic Party, right, and who are declining to state. So I think there's that piece of it. And then within the Democratic Party, I think the Progressive and Labor Caucuses are super important because they are the voice of consciousness, right? The voice that's there helping to shift things to the left. I think it's not enough. And that's part of why we felt like the WFP was needed in California. So yes, we need the Progressive and Labor Caucuses, and we need more. And so I think by having this just adds to the conversation and adds to the larger space. But I'm curious, Xiomara, what would you say?
Well, I have to say that I think contrary to popular belief, we built an incredible amount of independent political organizations in California. Like I started at Chirla in 2004, we did 1,200 contacts, and I started that electoral program. And I'm no longer there at the organization, but combined with their C3, C4, they're hitting over 300,000 contacts, and then that doesn't say how many people they actually turn out to vote. And that's significant. And they're not tied. Our organizations are not tied to the Democratic Party and don't want to be, because
exactly.
I think our organizations are very clear that even though we have some progressive forces, they're not the majority, even in a blue state like California. And these folks will continue to, sell out our communities for campaign donations and to stay in power. So I feel like that's my answer to that, in addition to what you shared. And I think I also want to share that when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that because right now, the way that California law works, Working Family Party is not an official party on the ballot. And so you could still be a registered Democrat if you choose that, and still align yourself with the Working Families Party and become a member.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you're looking for a really progressive voting bloc, whether or not people identify with the Democratic Party.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talk about inside-outside strategy all the time. So this is a little bit of inside-outside strategy of like, what's the current structure right now of how people get involved? And it's predominantly, the Democratic Party, but it's not enough. There's still lots of gaps.
And the way that the Working Families Party, Working Families Party is launching, is it a C3? Is it a C4? What's the structure right now?
I think it's not a C3, it's a political party. So when people like donate to it, it is political money. And there's those disclosures you have to make. I feel like there is a C3 structure, and this might be a better thing, in terms of like national staffing. There is a component there, I think, but I can't totally answer all that.
Got it. I want to, we have about 10 more minutes. I want to encourage our audience, if you have additional questions or comments, please let us know on YouTube or Facebook. I think my next question is in terms of fundraising strategy. So right now, I think when I first started doing electoral organizing, it was totally nonpartisan. It was 501c3. And so we didn't even touch candidates. And I think I've grown my understanding. And I think one of the questions that folks have is like, oh, well, will you donate money to candidates? That's a question that always comes up. And I'd love to hear if California Working Families Party has a line on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think part of the contribution part, that is part of helping candidates. So once there's an endorsement that is made, it might not look like money. It could also look like volunteering or having like campaign support. So it might look like helping with the phone bank one night or helping with the door knock or, so there's different ways to contribute to candidates, but I do believe that money is a piece of it. Right. And like I was saying before, like money is so prominent in elections right now. There is a need for that. So, we are fundraising individual donors. We're asking, so folks to be members. It's a monthly donation. It's a sliding scale, though. It could be $5 a month, could be 20, 30, 40, up to you. But the idea that you contribute monthly to be a part of this is, part of that. And then that money is part of what the regional and the statewide would talk about, like how to spend it. And so it is about candidates, though. Like, I think we want this space to be a candidates because we have a lot of C3s that already talk about issues, and and you can do that lobbying, like you said, like through your C3 or C4, and it's a different thing to talk about ballot measures and talk about legislation. But what we really need is candidate work, and the idea that right now corporations and private interests are driving and supporting lots of candidates, and we're not giving the same amount to folks that we want to see in leadership.
Yeah, I think that as I've grown, I think over the years, like I think we also have to retrain ourselves to look at power differently. I think you talked earlier about like, oh, we elect folks and then they're kind of left on their own. And then, I have been guilty of this and like pointing at like, see, they messed up. So in getting our own candidates, putting them forward, people from our community who are running for their community, not for themselves and just their egos and all that stuff, or, resume builder. I'm just wondering, like, what are the ways that you think that we need to retrain ourselves to think about politics and power?
Yeah, well, I think you said it there. Like, it's not just about yelling at people when they do something bad. It's like, okay, how do we work with them? And think about how do you get to the place where something doesn't go bad, right? So it's like, can we support them beforehand? Do they have the staff they need? Do they have the analysis? Do they have, like the full circle that they're going to need to be successful? And how do we keep in conversation? So I think, earlier, maybe 10, 20 years ago, it's more about, oh yeah, they're not doing their job. Let's just get them out of there, right? But it is about like, well, what do they need to do their job? And who has access to that and who doesn't? And how do we create a space where we're supporting them so that they are going to be successful, and not just, blame folks for something that they didn't do. So I think that is a big shift, because a lot of times we're coming from a space of scarcity, and we're coming from a space of like, oh, we got to defend all these things and we're under attack. And it's like, well, actually, are we under attack if California is 2/3 majority Democrat? Like,
right.
We are, but who's attacking us, right? And is it subtle attacks? And is it like these hidden things? And so I think getting smarter, getting more strategic, there's, all kinds of pieces to that we have to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, an example that I can think of off the top of my head is, we have George Gascon as our DA here. And, I'm not saying that everything he did in San Francisco was perfect and great, but I think politically he's very aligned with more of an abolitionist. I wouldn't call him an abolitionist, but he is more aligned with abolitionist framework, accountability, and really looking at public safety in a different way that's about investing in communities. And we're facing a couple of recalls here. So folks don't know, the governor is facing a recall election. The signatures have already been gathered here in LA County. For the city of LA, actually, Nithya, one of the more progressive council members who just got elected unseated and incumbent, is facing signatures for a recall, and now the DA. And so I think it has to be clear to folks that the right wing, like here in California, was the right wing started. Right. And then we began to fight back and have made some gains, but they have got a lot of fire in their belly and they're fighting back. And I feel like we need the Working Families Party here in California it can be a vehicle to unite us against like this right wing attack again. I don't want to go back to 20 years when we first met.
Yes. Well, yeah, for sure. And in San Francisco, we also have recalls happening. And I think this is where money can drive recalls, and they can, and a recall election is a little backwards in that it's the majority of people who vote. So if you don't get a lot of people to turn out, the risk is then just the recall people turn out, and then, they want a recall so they can win. So I think this is where money plays into politics. And so unless we have more defense mechanisms, and unless we have a structure that is building this power and, helping us create long-term support for these electeds, we're going to lose, right? Like, you look at Prop 22, the corporations put millions and millions of dollars to fight gig workers, right? And now they're going across the country doing the same thing. And it's like, we have to stop corporate elections. But how do we do that? Like, we need more structures. So again, it's not to say we should dismantle the Democrats or, like that they're completely at fault. It's like, we are up against huge, huge enemies right now, right? Billions of dollars. So we need more. We need more organizing. We need more spaces to engage people. And so WFP WFP is part of that bringing more into this.
Right. And as Organizing Upgrade, we feel like also it has to be a really broad front going up against this right wing and fascism, that we're facing. I want to remind folks that in, I think it was the 2000, we had a recall election and people didn't take it seriously. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, basically we had to vote on a recall and then vote on who would be the person if the recall won. And actually in the recall, there was more votes for the governor to keep him than there were actually votes for Schwarzenegger. And yet that's who became our governor for 8 years. And so we can't afford to sit on the sidelines and let the right wing win. Well, I'd love to just any closing thoughts you want to leave our audience with, not just in California, but across the country in terms of how do we continue to build independent political power? Well,
actually, for the California charter, the next step is these regional meetings. So over the next few months, there's going to be WFP chapter meetings to officially kind of kick off those chapters. So in the Bay Area, it's going to be end of July. LA, San Diego, Orange County, like they're all going to have their own kickoffs. So I encourage you to connect, get involved. You can look at the Working Families Party, their main website. You can join WFP and then you would get connected to the local organizing. So just really encourage folks to look into that and help share it with your friends. Because again, there's tons of people that are declined to state because they just don't feel the Democrats right now. And so let's reach out to those folks and tell them that there's a new place for them to go to.
Yeah, there's a real hunger for something different. And so thank you so much, Kimi, for, I will dare say, over 25 years of leadership, unapologetic here in California, all over the state. So thank you so much. And it was my pleasure to interview you. And for our audience, we're on almost every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific. That's 7 p.m. Eastern time. We go live on Facebook and YouTube. Please make sure to follow us and subscribe to Organizing Upgrade. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.